How do I tell if an email address is fake? Hi everyone, Leo Notenboom here for askleo.com. The very short answer is you may not be able to. There are two parts to what most email programs will use as a contact or an email address. One is the actual email address, and the other is called the display name. So, for example, you might see Ask Leo as the display name with leo@askleo.com in angle brackets. However, not all email programs will display it that way. For example, you might just see something that says Ask Leo. It might have an underline on it, it might have something that you could click on or hover over to show more, but the reality is it's only displaying the display name and hiding the actual email address associated with that. Spammers will often leverage that. What they will do is they will make the display name look like an email address and then have an email address behind it. For example, you might see from leo@askleo.com. But the real email address behind it is leo@somerandomservice.com. That unless you look more closely, you might think you're sending email or getting email from leo@askleo.com when in fact it's a completely different unrelated email address. Now, what we really want to look at next is the structure of the actual email address. An email address has several different parts. The first part is the actual email account. So using leo@askleo.com as my example, Leo up front is the email account. The @ sign is a separator that separates the account from what follows. What follows then is the domain, askleo.com, the domain of whatever mail server is supposed to handle that email. And the domain itself has several parts. In the case of askleo.com, there's the Ask Leo, which is the part that I purchased, the period, which is a separator, and then com, which is what's called a top-level domain. And to be clear, it is also possible to have multiple parts to that. So for example, newsletter.askleo.com is both a very legitimate domain, and in some cases, that form can be used to send and receive email. One of the first things you can do when you see an email address like leo@askleo.com is look up who owns the domain. What that would mean is going to a tool like whois.domaintools.com or any of several others and actually looking up askleo.com. You'll see that the domain is owned. It may not tell you who's got the domain, but you'll be able to see that yes, in fact, this domain exists. If it comes back as not found, then, well, it might be a fake email address. Another scenario, of course, is what I would call typos and misleading domains. For example, my email address is leo@askleo.com. If you were to get email from Leo, L-A-O, at askleo.com, it might be close enough to looking right, except it's clearly a typo and it's not me. Similarly, lookalike domains can do the same thing. For example, if you see email from leo@goaskleo.com, then that's not askleo.com. That's a completely separate and unrelated domain. In that case, then you might be tempted to think of it as being related to Ask Leo and potentially being legit, except there's a good chance that it's not. Now, there are character replacements, and these are a little bit trickier. The best example I can give you is that if we start with leo@askleo.com and we replace that L at the beginning with the number 1, well, they are two different email addresses. The difference between askleo.com and ask1eo.com, that is a completely different domain and is completely unrelated to askleo.com. And yet, it may look very similar if you're just taking a quick look at a from line or a to line. Now, one of the things that is very common in spam and scam emails is that the display name that we talked about earlier doesn't really match the email address. So everything looks legitimate. It's a perfectly well-formed email address. There's nothing really shaky about it. And there's a display name in front of it. And maybe you're seeing both of them. Except if you see that there is an obvious mismatch between the two. For example, if you see email that says it's from Bill Gates, but the email address is leo@askleo.com, that is a huge red flag. The name doesn't match the email address. It's a very quick thing to look at. Does the display name make sense for the email address that it's being associated with? By now, I think you're probably familiar with the concept of DNS. DNS is the service that maps things like domain names, like askleo.com, into their actual IP addresses. So for example, right now, somerandomservice.com maps to an IP address of 52.27.227.69. The mail infrastructure is also handled in DNS. There's what's called an MX record, which stands for Mail Exchange Record. And that identifies which mail server is supposed to handle the email for a specific domain. The tool that I recommend you use for this is called MX Toolbox. They have a MX lookup specifically for this kind of thing, and it'll tell you right away what the MX record, who the email server is supposed to be, and of course it'll tell you if there isn't one. If you look up the MX record for askleo.com, you'll find that it's handled by mail.askleo.com. The bottom line, though, and the reason that I started out by saying you may not be able to, is that everything could be valid. Remember, spammers can make the from line look whatever they want it to look like, which means they could be sending you spam that looks like it comes from Ask Leo. There's no way to prevent that. And what that means is you always need to be on your guard, regardless of what you see in the from line. For updates, for comments, for links related to this topic and more, visit askleo.com/164415. I'm Leo Notenboom. This is askleo.com. Thanks for watching.